I got my medical degree 3 years ago. My first real job was at an old, very underfunded public hospital in the outskirts of London. The building was a massive grey stone structure built in the 1930s. It always felt cold, no matter what time of year it was. I was a junior doctor. For the first 4 months, I only worked the day shift. It was stressful, but manageable. Then, in late November, a severe flu outbreak hit the staff. 2 doctors called in sick. The hospital administrator pulled me into his office and told me I was covering the overnight shift in the West Wing. The West Wing was half abandoned. They were renovating the upper floors, so only the second floor was actually taking patients. And that night, we only had 4 people in those beds. My shift started at 8 p.m. By midnight, the nurses had gone to the break room on the other side of the hospital. I was completely alone at the main desk. The silence in that old building was heavy. The only sound was the low hum of the vending machine down the hall. At 2:14 a.m., the hook started. I was reading a chart when the fluorescent light at the far end of the long hallway simply snapped off. Click. 10 seconds later, the next light in the row turned off. Click. Someone, or something, was turning them off one by one, moving toward my desk. There were no motion sensors in this wing. They were manual switches. Click. 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 Half the hallway was now swallowed in pitch black. I stood up. I didn't call out. I just watched the darkness creeping closer. Then, the lights stopped turning off. The hallway was split exactly in half, light and dark. From deep inside the pitch black section, I heard a sound. It was a woman. She was crying. It wasn't a soft, sad cry. It was a wet, heavy sobbing. The kind of crying someone does when they are in absolute, unbearable physical agony. My medical training kicked in before my common sense did. I thought a patient had wandered out of their room and fallen. I grabbed my penlight from my pocket and walked past the barrier of the working lights, stepping into the dark hallway. The air immediately felt freezing. "Hello?" I said. My voice echoed loudly off the linoleum floor. The crying didn't stop. I followed the sound. It was coming from room 218, a room that was supposed to be empty. I pushed the heavy wooden door open. The room was dark. My penlight cut through the blackness. Standing in the far corner, facing the peeling wallpaper, was a woman. She was wearing a faded hospital gown. Her back was to me. Her shoulders were shaking violently as she sobbed. "Miss," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You shouldn't be out of bed. Let me help you." The sobbing stopped instantly. Complete, dead silence. Slowly, she turned around to face me. My penlight hit her face, and my stomach violently dropped. The lower half of her jaw was completely gone. The skin from her cheekbones down to her neck looked like it had been shredded by a wild animal. Blood and thick yellow fluid were dripping onto the front of her gown. I could see the exposed, jagged bone of her upper teeth. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. She stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Her throat moved. Despite having no lower jaw, a voice came out of her. It sounded like two pieces of dry leather rubbing together. They took it while I was awake. Before my brain could even process the words, she lunged. She didn't run like a human. She sprinted at me, with her head tilted unnaturally to the side. The wet slapping of her bare feet on the floor was deafening. I slammed the door shut and ran. I sprinted down the dark hallway blindly. I heard the door of room 218 crash open behind me. I heard her wet, slapping footsteps rapidly closing the distance. She was fast. Too fast. I reached the end of the corridor and grabbed the first door handle I could find. I yanked it open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut behind me. I pushed my entire body weight against the heavy metal door. Outside, the slapping footsteps stopped, right in front of the door. I held my breath. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard it physically hurt. For 2 full minutes, nothing happened. Then, I heard the slow, scraping sound of bare feet dragging away down the hall, fading into the darkness. I let out a shaking breath. My hands were trembling violently. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone to use the flashlight. I turned the light on. The room was freezing. The walls were lined with stainless steel drawers. In the center of the room were 3 metal tables. I had locked myself in the basement morgue. Because of the renovations, they were storing bodies here until the main wing had space. There was a thick, black body bag resting on the table right next to me. I backed away toward the door. I just wanted to get out. Then, the silence broke. "Doctor." The voice was a low, raspy whisper. It didn't come from the hallway. It came from inside the room. I froze. I aimed my phone light at the black body bag on the center table. The heavy metal zipper on the bag was slowly sliding down. Psst. A pale, grey hand reached out from inside the bag and gripped the edge of the metal table. The fingernails were black and cracked. "Who's there?" I whispered. My voice cracked. The bag fell open. A man sat up. He was completely naked, his skin the color of dirty ash. There was a massive Y-shaped autopsy scar stitched crudely down his chest. But the worst part was his neck. It was broken. His head hung heavily toward his left shoulder, almost touching his collarbone. He turned his body to look at me. The dead, milky white eyes locked onto my face. Then, his lips curled back into a massive, stretching smile. It was a smile of pure, malicious joy. He swung his legs over the side of the table and dropped to the floor. When his bare feet hit the tiles, I heard the dry crack of stiff joints popping. He started walking toward me, but he didn't walk normally. His body jerked and twisted with every step, his head lolling heavily to the side, his dead eyes never leaving mine. He was still smiling. I turned around and grabbed the heavy iron handle of the morgue door. I pushed down. It was locked. The mechanism had jammed from the inside. I pulled it frantically. I shoved my shoulder against the metal. It wouldn't budge.
I looked back over my shoulder. The smiling, crooked corpse was only 10 feet away. 8 feet. I could smell the overpowering stench of formaldehyde and rotting meat. He reached his grey hand out toward my face. The joints in his fingers cracked loudly. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled the door handle with every ounce of strength I had left. Click. The door violently swung open. I fell backward into the hallway. I didn't stay to look back. I scrambled to my feet and ran. That was only 3 a.m. For the next 4 hours, I was trapped in a cat and mouse game inside that hospital. I couldn't go back to the front desk. Every time I tried to find the main exit, the stairwell doors would be chained shut from the outside. I spent an hour hiding inside a narrow metal supply locker on the 3rd floor. I stood perfectly still in the dark, while heavy, dragging footsteps paced back and forth directly outside the locker door. I heard whispers in languages I didn't understand, echoing through the air vents. I saw tall, impossibly thin shadows standing at the ends of hallways, just watching me before slipping around the corners. It wasn't a hospital anymore. It was a hunting ground, and they were playing with me. At 6:45 a.m., the pale morning sunlight finally broke through the tall glass windows of the lobby. The heavy atmosphere in the building instantly vanished. The oppressive cold lifted. The front double doors were perfectly unlocked. I walked out into the freezing London morning. I didn't have my coat. I didn't have my keys. I just kept walking until I reached a busy tube station. I never went to the police. What would I tell them? That a dead woman without a jaw chased me into a room where an autopsied corpse tried to grab me. They would have revoked my medical license and put me in a psych ward. I emailed my resignation that same morning. I told the administration I had a family emergency back home and had to leave the country. I moved back to the States. I work at a small private clinic now. It only operates from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I will never work a night shift again. Because sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment and the lights are off, I hear the wet, heavy sound of bare feet slapping against the linoleum floor. And I know, one day, they might figure out where I moved.